Welcome to the Seed to Table video series. This video is produced in partnership between the Calgary Horticultural Society and the City of Calgary as part of a circular economy initiative. The circular economy eliminates waste and pollution and conserves resources. It is a shift from a throwaway to a circular mindset to extend the life cycle of goods, food, and resources through better design and continuous reuse so nothing goes to waste. The table specifically is a low input growing initiative that goes through each of the steps required in a gardening journey. The classes and resources in this initiative will help you to become increasingly self-sufficient, save money, and reduce waste. Below you see the steps in our seed to table journey. You can start the cycle at different points of the year, but may have to adjust what or where you're growing. Planning is a very important part of this journey. Don't grow what you won't use. Research plant growing conditions and use as much of a plant as possible. Think about how to reduce inputs at each step of the way. For example, build up good soil to reduce reliance on fertilizers and use renewable materials instead of plastics. Be a good observer and you can catch potential problems early. Overall, think about how you can become more self-sufficient, save money, and reduce waste. Enjoy the following video to answer those questions.
Hello there, my name is Jennifer Hoglund, and today we're going to talk all about lactofermentation, a really great way to preserve all that produce that comes out of our gardens. So we're going to start out by talking about exactly what lactofermentation is and how it differs from regular fermentation. We're going to go into why eating fermented foods is so great for us and our health. Look at the ingredients that we need and some optional ingredients, the equipment that we need to lactoferment, and then we're going to talk about the two different processes for lactofermentation, brining and dry salting, and when to use each. Then we're going to go into determining when our ferment is ready to eat, how to store it once it is ready, and of course the really important and best part, how to eat them and use them in our kitchens. So let's get started. So what exactly is lactofermentation? Well, the process of general fermentation has been going on by humans for thousands of years. And with it, we have produced things like wine, beer, yogurt, cheese, sourdough, black tea, miso, kombucha, vinegar, kefir, cultured butter, cultured cream. The list of products goes on and on. During fermentation, it's bacteria or yeast, sometimes both, that convert carbohydrates in a product into acids or alcohol. So specifically during lactofermentation, it is a bacteria called lactobacillus. It feeds on sugars in vegetables or fruit and produces lactic acid and carbon dioxide in the process. Okay, lactofermentation produces products like sauerkraut or kimchi, fermented pickles, curtido, and many of our condiments, including a lot of our hot sauces. They're all made with the process of lactofermentation. And there are three things we need for lactofermentation to occur. We need to have the right salinity or salt concentration in our product. That encourages only the lactobacillus bacteria, which is important. We also need an anaerobic environment, so no oxygen. And lastly, we need an acidic environment. All three of those conditions ensure that it is only the lactobacillus bacteria that is growing and not any other things. So why should we be lacto-fermenting our own foods? Well, first and foremost, for flavor. That nice addition of lactic acid really adds some tang and can really give a pop to a lot of our foods. Second reason is for preservation. When we ferment foods, they can keep for much, much longer. It's a very safe method of preservation where we're not adding any chemicals or any weird additives to our foods. Third reason is that lactobacillus bacteria is a probiotic. All right, one of those great bacteria that's good for our gut health aids in digestion, and is great for our immune system. Okay, those bacteria, the lactobacillus bacteria, are really good at breaking down some of those carbohydrates in our food, making them much more easily digestible than when they are raw. Another great reason for lactofermenting our foods is it's a really great method of preservation that does not reduce the amount of nutrients in our food. So some methods of preservation, like canning, where we go through a cooking process, reduces the nutrients in the final product. Lactofermentation is different. It not only retains the nutrients in our food, but it actually increases some of those nutrients. Things like vitamin B12 specifically, but also many of our other B vitamins. And very importantly, vitamin C is increased when we lactoferment our foods. It's one of the reasons that sailors many years ago used to lactoferment things like cabbage. It's stored for a long time. It had a high vitamin C rate, and it really helped keep away that scurvy while they were at sea. So what do we actually need to lactoferment our food? Well, there's really only two must-haves. We must have produce of some kind, a fruit or a vegetable, and we must have salt. Let's take a look at those two. So let's start with produce. Whenever possible, we want to use organic, of course. We do not want to clean our produce with soaps or cleaners because we don't want to fully get rid of all of the bacteria on it. Lactobacillus bacteria occurs naturally in our soils, in our air, and in our rainwater, and we don't want to sterilize that lactobacillus off. So we just want to clean off the dirt in the soil with plain water. That's it. Okay, if there's any wax coatings or sprays, we do want to make sure we get those off as well because they can inhibit the growth of bacteria as well. If we are purchasing our produce from a store, we do want to make sure that it hasn't been sprayed with anything. So if you don't know, ask for sure. If you're at a farmer's market, they will absolutely know what has been used or not been used on their products. We can ferment pretty much any produce out there, actually, and it's really fun to experiment with different things. So vegetables, the only vegetable that we really don't recommend lactofermenting is broccoli. It's just one that is really not good fermented. It produces a lot of sulfur compounds. So that is one. Don't try that one, but try any other vegetable out there lactofermented, even other brassica vegetables, just not the broccoli. Okay, we can also ferment fruit. So berries are especially tasty. Some fruit that is really, really soft, like raspberries, don't hold up well because produce does soften a little bit, but more firm berries like blueberries are absolutely fantastic. Or any of our stone fruit, apples, things like that also are great fermented. Forage roots and greens, fantastic. Even eggs. So many of you are familiar with pickled hard-boiled eggs. You can absolutely lactoferment hard-boiled eggs as well. The only other thing that we need for lactofermentation is salt. Salt is really important for a number of reasons. It draws water out of our produce, which helps to create a brine, a liquid, salty environment, which makes sure that it's anaerobic, no air or no oxygen, right? It hardens the pectin in our plant cells, which keeps our produce nice and crisp as it ferments. It increases a nice salinity that is required by lactobacillus to grow. So we don't have it salty enough, we won't get lactobacillus growing, and that's important. And very importantly, it inhibits yeasts. Okay, yeast does not like a salty environment, and we do not want to encourage yeast. Not because it is necessarily a bad thing, but because yeasts, when they break down those sugars in our produce, turn it into alcohol instead of lactic acid. And alcohol is not what we're going for. That's a completely different ferment. We want to concentrate on producing that lactic acid when we are doing lactofermentation. So salt is really important for all of those reasons. What kind of salt do we like to use? Well, we can use pretty much any salt as long as it doesn't have any iodine or anti-caking agents in it. So most of our table salt does have those two things. So we don't want to use table salt generally, but most other salts will work. Doesn't matter what size they are, it doesn't matter what color or what minerals they have in there. All of those different things can add a little bit of character to our ferments, and it's really fun to experiment with salts that have different colors and different minerals. That's great. Just make sure it doesn't have iodine or anti-caking agents. That can inhibit the growth of our lactobacillus and can give it an off color and flavor as well. So feel free to experiment with which type of salt you use. So that's it for mandatory ingredients for lactofermentation. There are a few things that are optional that we can use. And the first one is water. So there are two different processes for lactofermentation. One uses water and salt combined to create a brine, and one just uses straight salt. So sometimes we do use water when we're using the brining method, and we need to make sure that water is filtered. Okay, we do not want chlorine or fluoride in that water because both of those things inhibit bacteria growth. And we are trying to grow some lactobacillus bacteria here. So we want to make sure no chlorine or no fluoride, so filter, or if we only have chlorine in our water, we can leave that water out on the counter for 24 hours, allow that chlorine to evaporate off. There are some other ingredients that we can add to our ferments to really amp up the flavor as well. Herbs and spices, we are completely unlimited in what we can use here. So really feel free to get creative with which herbs and spices you add to your ferments. They can really challenge you and your creativity and give you some really unique flavors. Another thing that many people add to their lactoferments are leaves of grapes, oaks, cherries, raspberries, or blackberries. And what those leaves do is they just help to keep those vegetables crisp. Just like we would add those same leaves to a vinegar pickle, they do the exact same thing in a lactofermentation. The last thing is either whey or water kefir or a little bit of brine from a previous lactoferment. Okay, what those help to do is really kickstart that fermentation process. They contain some lactic acid already, they contain some of that lactobacillus bacteria already, and they just get the process going faster. So that is it for ingredients that you need or can put into your lactoferments. Next up is the equipment that we need to lactoferment. And the very first thing we need is a container, something to put our produce in and allow that fermentation to happen within. So we're really looking here for glass or ceramic container of some kind. Plastic and metal does not work nearly as well. Mason jars are a fantastic option for small scale fermenting. They're readily available. They're quite cheap to use, and there are many covers and weights made especially for them, which we'll get into. There are also some absolutely gorgeous larger ceramic crocks available. These are oftentimes handed down from generation to generation, which is great because they can be quite expensive to buy new. They're quite large and solid, and some of them are handmade, so they are quite expensive to buy new, but passed down, or if you can find them secondhand, a great savings that way as well. These are also really, really heavy, and they make a large amounts at a time. So if you're really into the lactofermenting, you absolutely love your kimchi, a large crock might be a great investment for you. The second piece of equipment that we need is a weight. In the fermentation world, we call these followers. And these are used to keep our produce submerged under our brine. We don't want our produce exposed to air because then it can grow the right type of the wrong type of bacteria, excuse me. If it's under the water, it's anaerobic, no oxygen, and that's where our lactobacillus bacteria grows. So keeping it submerged is really important, and that's what our weights are for. Things to think about when choosing a weight is it needs to be easy to grip and get in and out of our container. It needs to be easy to sterilize. That's very important. And we need it to sit in our container so that we have the brine over top by about 1 inch. All right, so there are lots of options that will work here. We can use a piece of cabbage leaf. This is very common with people who are doing a cabbage ferment. You already have those outer cabbage leaves. That works fantastically. You can use a small jar or a plate that will fit into our container nice and snugly. You can use rocks or marbles or baking weights, as long as we sterilize them first to make sure there's no bacteria on there. We can put them in cheesecloth, in muslin, or as pictured here on the bottom left, in a plastic bag and use that to hold our produce down. We can also use a plastic bag full of brine. Okay, it's heavy enough to keep our produce submerged, and if it breaks, we just have extra brine added to our ferment. No harm, no foul there. So that works really well. And the last thing that we can use for weights is specific glass or ceramic fermentation weights that are specifically used for fermentation. So on the bottom right here, we have glass ones that are used specifically for mason jars and fermenting. They work fantastically well. They're available in wide mouth or standard mouth for both types of mason jars. On the top, we have ceramic weights that came with this ceramic crock to use on top. So lots of things that we can use, all work great. Use what you have for sure. The last piece of equipment that we need is a cover. And once again, there are a number of options here as well. Okay, the point of the cover is to prevent anything from falling into our ferment, to keep oxygen from getting in there, but also we need to allow carbon dioxide to escape. So our lactobacillus bacteria, as they're reproducing, is not only making lactic acid, it's also making carbon dioxide. And we need a way for that carbon dioxide gas to escape from our containers. So our cover needs to do that as well. There's a few different options. On the very far right picture here, we have an airlock. And these are what are also used in a different kind of ferment when we make wine and beer. Same airlock. They have mason jar lids that specifically fit an airlock if you're using mason jars for fermenting that work really well. Okay, another option is our fermentation nipples. On the far left side here, those blue ones are the ones that are available from Mason Tops. And these work really well also. They are a rubber material that has a little tiny hole in the top of that nipple. So when there is enough pressure from the carbon dioxide, that hole opens up, carbon dioxide can escape. And when there's not enough pressure, that hole kind of seals up. So it works really well. Nice cheap option if you're looking. Next option that we have is one from Crowdsource. And this is the top left-hand picture. This is a lid that uses the screw band from our mason jars and has a little water well in it. That water well allows carbon dioxide to bubble through it and escape, but doesn't allow oxygen in or anything else in the jar. Works really well. The Crowdsource one also happens to have a little spring and a perforated plate in it that acts as a weight at the same time. So it's kind of a two-in-one product. And many of our fermentation crocks have a built-in lid that also has a little bit of a water well in it. Once again, allows that carbon dioxide gas to bubble through the water and escape, but doesn't let anything in. You do not have to go out and buy any of these products if you don't already have them. You can absolutely use a regular lid. Just keep it on loosely, and every day or two, kind of open it up just a little bit to allow the gases to escape. We call this burping when we're talking about fermenting. Now on to the actual process of fermenting itself. There are two different methods that we use for fermenting: brining and dry salting. Which method you choose will depend on the amount of water naturally found in your produce and the size of produce that you're using. So generally, we use brining for larger, drier produce, and we use dry salting for produce that is in smaller pieces, like shredded or chopped pieces, and for produce that contains more moisture. With brining, we create a saltwater solution first. So we typically use a 2% solution for almost everything, and it's really important to be precise when we're determining the amount of salt that is going into our ferment. If we have the wrong concentration of salt, we may get other bacteria that will want to grow. So very important to measure accurately when we're determining the amount of salt to go in. So for a 2% solution, for most of our produce, we want to use about 5 grams of salt for every cup of water. There are a couple exceptions to that 2% rule, and the first is cucumbers and peppers. If we're doing larger pieces of cucumbers and peppers, we want to use a 3.5 to a 5% salt solution. That's 10 grams of salt for every cup of water. The other exception is when we're making hot sauce. If we have finely chopped peppers that we will turn into hot sauce, spicy peppers, we want to use a 10% salt solution. That's 25 grams of salt for every cup of water. Once we have the correct brine or salt concentration in our water, we want to put our produce into our container and pour that brine over top. We add our weight on top of that and ensure that that brine's a half an inch to an inch above the top of our weight. We really want to make sure that our produce is fully submerged here. The dry salting method we use for much smaller pieces like vegetables that have been shredded or chopped up finely, or for produce that has a lot of moisture already in it. In this method, we add plain salt to our produce directly, and then we massage that salt into the produce. Okay, this can take a little bit of time and a little bit of effort. You can see on the very top there, that's my two boys getting in there with their hands and massaging that cabbage, and that's what you need to do. Sometimes if the water is not coming out readily, it helps to let it rest for 20 to 30 minutes and then come back and give it a massage afterwards. That can really help to bring that moisture out. We can also try pounding it with a tamper or any hard kitchen utensil just to smash that produce a little bit and get more of that water out of it. Whatever you need to do to get the moisture out is good. Once we have a significant amount of water out of the produce, we're going to then put that produce into our container. We're going to add the liquid that came out of it as well, and we're going to tamp it down really well into the container. Get those muscles going. We don't want any air pockets left in that produce. Okay, just like we did for brining, we want to add our weight to the top, and we want to make sure that that liquid goes a half to 1 inch above the weight, making sure that our produce is fully submerged. If we don't have enough liquid from the dry salting process, we can top it up with a little bit of that 2% brine if needed. Once we have our produce in our jars and our salt in our jars, we just want to double check that our produce is fully submerged in the liquid. Make sure that we have that weight on top there, and make sure we have a cover on our containers. At that point, we just need to wait for fermentation to occur. Great place for this to happen is on our kitchen countertops. It is out at room temperature there, which is perfect, hopefully out of direct sunlight, and our kitchen countertop is a great place for us to observe on a regular basis our ferment. After that, we wait. The process of lactofermentation can take anywhere from 3 days to usually a maximum of 6 weeks. And I know that's a large time frame, but it is very, very dependent on what type of produce we are fermenting and how much sugar it naturally contains, as well as the size of pieces that we're fermenting. Okay, first few days, we're really encouraging bacteria that feeds off oxygen and starts to change the environment in our container from aerobic with oxygen to anaerobic without oxygen. Okay, after that point, that's when our lactobacillus bacteria really starts to get going. And there's a number of different species of lactobacillus bacteria. Some occur and really proliferate at the very beginning of our ferment when it's not too acidic in there, and other species that occur much later in our ferments when it's very acidic and there's lots of lactic acid already present. So it's many different species of bacteria that occur as the process continues. We will also, during our ferment, start to get a lot of bubbling action. That is the carbon dioxide that is being produced by that bacteria. And it will bubble up in the jar and hopefully escape through our cover. A good sign for us that it's time to check if our ferment is done is once that bubbling really starts to slow down. So how do we know when our ferment is ready to eat? Well, how long it's going to take is dependent on a number of things. The temperature that our ferment is happening at. So the higher the temperature, the faster the bacteria is going to reproduce and the faster the process will happen. Okay, up to a certain point, there is a maximum temperature. It also will depend on how big our pieces of produce are, how much sugar is in our produce. Okay, the higher the sugar content, the faster it will ferment. So things like fruit that have a higher sugar content are going to ferment much, much faster than some of our vegetables that have very low amounts of sugar. Okay, all of those things are going to affect how long it takes for our ferment to process. We can also keep an eye, like I mentioned, on how many bubbles are being produced. If that bubbling starts to slow down, that's another indication to start checking. The really short answer to how do we tell if it's ready is it's ready when it tastes right for you. So once that bubbling starts to slow down, get out a nice clean fork or a spoon, open up your cover and taste it. See what it tastes like to you. Some people are going to prefer a little bit more tangy, a little bit longer ferment that has more lactic acid. Some people are going to like a ferment that is a little bit lighter on the acidity. So it's absolutely up to you when you think it is ready. Keep tasting until it tastes right to you, and when it's right, then it's done. So once we've decided that our ferment is ready for us, we need to stop the fermentation process from continuing. We don't want any more lactic acid produced because we don't want it any more acidic. We've already decided it tastes perfect, and we don't want that bacteria reproducing. And the way we stop that from happening is to put it into a cold environment. So back in the old days, that meant putting it into our cold cellar where it lasted for at least a year, long enough to make it to the next harvest season. Most of us don't have a cold cellar anymore, so today we typically use a refrigerator. Okay, that just means we take off our cover that we used for fermentation and put on a solid lid and then put it directly into the fridge. Easy as that. If we're fermenting in a very large ceramic crock, maybe we would consider dividing it into smaller containers and then putting it into our refrigerator. All right, that cold slows down the activity and the multiplication of the bacteria, keeps it at the same flavor, and reduces or completely prevents more CO2 from being produced. It will keep in our refrigerator for at least 12 months. Okay, a really, really long time. Whenever you need to or would like to eat some, all you do is take your jar out, remove whatever amount that you'd like, put the cover back on, and back into your fridge. Okay, this will last us for sure until we have more produce ready next year to again lactoferment. So there are some problems that can occur during lactofermentation. They are not overly common, but because this method isn't familiar to a lot of people, I really wanted to highlight for them so you know if something is an issue or not. The first thing and the most common is what we call calm yeast. This is what is being shown in the picture at right. It is not a mold. Molds are fuzzy. Yeasts are not fuzzy. Calm yeast forms kind of a film, a white film on top of our ferment, and it is not a big deal. Okay, calm yeast is totally okay. It's not going to hurt anybody. It just looks a little weird. So what we suggest is just scraping it off with a clean utensil, putting your cover back on, and continuing with the ferment. All right. Mold really depends on how much and what color. Okay, so mold is always going to be fuzzy. It can show up in different colors: green, blue, gray, black, pink. And if it's pink, that's the bad one. So if you see pink mold, you need to immediately chuck it. We have a little phrase in fermenting and in preservation in general: when in doubt, chuck it out. Because it's always better to be safe than sorry. We are feeding this food to our families and we want to be sure it is safe for them. So when in doubt, chuck it out. If it's pink mold, for sure chuck it out. If it's green, blue, gray, or black, if it's a little tiny bit, we can remove that and continue with our ferment. If there's quite a lot of it on there, then it's probably better to chuck it out at that point. If our produce in there has turned a really dark color, dark gray, black almost, that's another indication to chuck it out. If it's got a really strong smell, not just that lactic acid smell, but something else, better safe than sorry, chuck that out as well. So those issues are not very common, but there are some things we can do to make sure that those issues do not crop up. Okay, the first one is proper concentration of salt. Make sure your salt levels are accurate, measure. All right. Second most important thing is to make sure that our produce is fully submerged in the liquid. Most problems occur when we have produce sticking out of the liquid and therefore in an oxygen-rich environment, and that's when we tend to get molds and yeasts. We don't want that to happen. So make sure your produce is always submerged, and make sure during your lactofermentation you keep them at the correct temperature. Room temperature is perfect. So I really encourage you to start out with just plain produce and either a brining technique or a dry salting technique, and practice that first. Once you've done that a few times and you're comfortable, it's time to get creative. Combine different produce together. Try something on the sweet side. Try some berries or some other fruit. Add some herbs and some spices to your ferments and see how creative you can get. It is unlimited the number of flavors and options that you can do with lactofermentation. And I just really encourage you to experiment. So a lot of people start making ferments and then are a little bit at a loss as to what to do with them once they're made. And that's what this is for. So there are tons of ways to get these delicious lactofermentations into our bellies. Okay, we can eat them straight. They are very common as a side dish in many different cultures and cuisines. So think Korean cuisine where they have banchan and multiple fermented side dishes, or sauerkraut on the side of many of our German, Ukrainian, Polish cuisines. We can just snack and nibble on them. We can add these ferments to salads or grain bowls as one of the options, vegetable options. We can add them to give a little bit of tang and acid to casseroles and soups and stews. We can absolutely use them to top burgers and hot dogs and sandwiches. Good sauerkraut on a hot dog is a classic. We can even blend them a little bit into dips and salad dressings. They do have that acidity there, so they can absolutely act as a vinegar in dips and salad dressings. We can just get an extra bang of good gut bacteria by adding a bit of our ferments to smoothies. We can add them to sushi rolls. And if we want to be very, very healthy, we can use the leftover brine in our ferments as gut shots. Anybody heard of gut shots? Lots and lots of probiotics right in one little shot glass of liquid. So don't forget to have a lot of fun with lactofermentation. There is an infinite amount of really unique and fun, cool things that we can make with the produce from our garden. Yes, there are a couple rules to follow. We need to make sure we have the right concentration of salt. We need to make sure our produce is submerged at all times. But they're very easy rules to follow to ensure that we have safe, amazingly tasty food right from our gardens. If you would like some further information, I've listed here some websites and some books that have some great ideas on fermentation, specifically lactofermentation. They have some great pictures and some great recipes that you can absolutely try. So feel free to take a picture or quickly sketch down these websites and books for further information. So thank you for listening to our video today. We learned how to preserve our harvests using lactofermentation, which allows us to become more self-sufficient in our gardens, hopefully save some money and reduce waste, all while improving our health by eating lacto-fermented foods. Thank you very much. If you have any more questions or need more information on the Seed to Table program or gardening in general, please reach out to Calgary Horticultural Society and visit our website at calhort.org.